could I put down? I can put ordered pair of 3, 11.1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And the second point, because they tell me a sub 7, and they say a sub 7 equals 23.9, I should be able to put 7, comma, and 23.9. So what I'm going to be checking in order for you to take the test is I will make sure that you have 12 done. Today I'm going to probably, or 11 done. I'm probably going to look at 10, 9, and 8A. Those are the ones that I haven't checked. And then to take the test, you'll have to have 12 and 13 done also. So in this one, what I'm looking at in both question 5 and 6, and then 9 and 10. They ask you to write the explicit formula only in 5 and 6, but in 9 and 10 you have to write both explicit and recursive. Today's homework quiz, you're going to be asked to write recursive and explicit, and then you're going to be asked to give a certain number in the sequence. So if I'm looking at this, the first thing I need to do is find my common difference or my slope. And to find the slope up here, I am going to take and subtract my y-coordinates over my x-coordinates. I'm taking 23.9 minus 11.1 divided by 7 minus 3. So if I do that, subtracting, I should have come out with, when I did the division, 3.2. Okay? That's taking 23.9 minus 11.1 divided by 7 minus 4. It comes out to 3.2. My next step, if I'm writing an explicit formula, explicit simply means no point slope form. So if I am taking a look here, I might decide, oh, as I'm looking at this, my point slope form is a to the n. Now on the test, I'm going to talk about what's on the test today. I'm going to start with that a to the n. And if I'm using point slope form, I'm going to have 3.2 times. I might have started with n minus, since I'm going with the first 0.3, plus 11.1. When you look at this in point slope form, what they usually do in our sequences is they want this to not be n minus 3, but n minus 1, right? So I might use my distributive property and multiply this out and go, oh, that's 3.2 n minus 9.6 plus 11.1. What do I end up with for the y-intercept, or when I add my like terms? I have a to the n equals 3.2, and what did we get back here when we add those together? 4.7 did it come out? A to the n is equal to 3.2. Take 11.1 minus 9.6. Right? 11.1 minus 9.6 gives us how much? 1.5 we are looking at it, right? So this is my equation explicitly in slope-intercept form. If I want to do it like in the point slope form, the answer that I'm going to look for is I need to know when n is 1. So I have to have 3.2 times n minus 1. And if I would plug in 1 here, what do I end up with back here for my y point? 4.7. So if I replace this, so I would take either of these two answers. Were those the two answers that it had in the back?
Yeah.
I don't think it ever gives you this answer. They aren't ever going to give it with the n minus 3, with a 3 or the 7 in there for an answer choice when it's explicit formula. They either want this to be a 1, or they want to use the n minus 1 or to use n. Okay? So you have to get it into using either point slope form, but then you have to use the 1 here, or you have to have an n. Okay.
And that's how you want it on the test.
That's all on that part of the test when we do that. Okay. So in number 10, again, if I'm looking at the explicit formula, now this one, when you looked at the answer, didn't they have as one of the answers was n minus 2? Wasn't that one of them if you turn to the back in number 9? You should have found the slope. Remember, you're looking at the point 212, and your second point was 830. 860. So first thing you had to do was find the slope. 60 minus 12 over 8 minus 2, right? We got 8 for our slope. 48 over 6 is 8. So when you go to write the explicit formula, so today on the quiz, sometimes it's easier to start explicit if we are looking at that. You have to use the notation. Since they had S sub 2, we're going to use S sub n. Someone said, does it matter if I use A sub n or S sub n or no, I won't mark that wrong, but you do have to have that sub. And in this case, if we know our slope, we don't know our y-intercept, so we might go with n minus 2 plus 12. Can I use that as one of my explicit equations? Did it have that answer in the back when you checked? Yeah. And I know the rate of change of the slope is 1. What's my first term going to have to be? 12 minus 8 gives us 4. Which is what if we are looking over here, right, this was our 0 term. This is our 0 term, is negative 4, right? So, going back, I know my first term is 4. My rule is that we are doing what? A to the n, or S to the n minus 1, sub 1, and we are adding 8 for n greater than 1. So on the test, I'm going to be asking you to do both, okay? And then I'm also going to ask you, I might give you a sequence and ask you to write one or the other. Like I might give you a sequence like when we take a look at some of the ones over here. So the other couple of questions, let's take a look at those. That the first week, he jogged 14 miles. Quite impressive, I have to say. And that I've been trying to run 5K for 3 miles. I caught that. So, by the 25th week, so we got to go week to miles. 25th week, he's now up to 28 miles. Okay. And it says, well, if the number continues successive weeks in the sequence, what should the weekly increase? All they're asking you to do is find the slope. The m, the common difference. Y sub 2 minus y sub 1, beginning of the unit. X sub 2 minus x sub 1. That's all they're asking you to do to finish question 17 and 18. They just want to know, what are you adding? They don't say write a recursive, write an explicit, just what are you adding each week? How much more do you run each week? Okay? Tuesday, which is going to be 6. 14 questions, 72 points. So when I'm taking a look, what is going to be on your test? So you look at the poster over here. I can create an equation to model a relationship. I can create an equation to model a relationship. What am I talking about for that type of question on the test? When you take a look at your review as we are doing it, this might be where I give you 2 points and ask you to write an equation. This might be where I give you a story situation or a table and I ask you to write an equation. It might be where I give you a graph with 2 points on it. Easiest form, if I'm giving you that, it might be point slope form. This is going back to writing equations. Should I see anything like a sub n when I'm writing an equation? No. If you do, it's automatically wrong. This is where you're going with the y equals your mx plus b equation. This is where you might be writing an equation with point slope form. It could be standard form, okay? But you're going to just be writing the equation, and I will give you either a point, 2 points, I'll give you a graph, or I'll give you a table, and I'll say write an equation. There's sometimes that I'm going to specify, like on the last quiz when I said, make sure this equation is in slope-intercept form, but if I don't say anything, if there's nothing in the directions on your test next Tuesday, you can write it in whichever form you like, okay? Which generally then the easiest one is point slope. The next standard, and I'll tell you how many points those were worth also. The next standard is I can write an arithmetic sequence, recursive and explicit. In this first one, there's a possibility of 16 points total. Each each one is pretty much worth 4 points. In this one, 12 points total. One of them was almost exactly like what I gave you today. I'll give you a sequence and say, write it explicit, then write it recursively. Another one, I might give you a recursive formula and say, write it explicitly. What does it look like? So, thinking about that as we are looking. Okay, so I can write the arithmetic sequence recursive and explicitly. If I am looking at my next standards that you are going to be looking at, the next one is I can interpret and compare key features. Now, since you are writing this, I leave this one blank and I put down what are your key features. When I talk about key features in a linear equation, okay, that's when I'm going to compare their slopes. That's when I'm going to compare their y-intercepts, okay? Those are the key features of linear. You want to tell me something about the slant of the line. Is it positive or is it negative? You might want to tell me, I noticed that they're y-intercepts, okay? So you're going to tell me key features. You might want to think about with linear, will the two lines intersect? If I would graph them, so like if I give you a table and then I give you an equation and I say, you know what, if you were going to graph both of these, will they intersect? If they're going to intersect, right, if they're going to have a point of intersection, if they're going to be looking at that point of intersection, what has to be the case? Can their slopes be the same if they're going to intersect? Could their y-intercepts be the same?
Yeah.
They could, but they wouldn't have to be, right? What has to be, if they're going to intersect, if two lines are going to cross each other, okay? So if I think of those two lines crossing, right? What has to be the case is that their slopes have to be not the same. Could they both be positive slopes? Yeah, they just have to be different positive slopes. They could both be negative slopes, right? They're still going to go down, but they cross at a point. So, thinking about that. When we think about key features of your, what's the other type we graphed? Absolute value, right? When I talk about my key features for absolute value, what am I talking about? Well, remember, what does the absolute value equation look like? Y equals, it's our m times x minus, and I don't think we used x1 and y1, right? I think they used h and k, and if you look at that page in your notes, I am going to ask you, what does the m do? What does the x1 do? What does the y1 do? What does the m do? That determines the what of my absolute value. Not just the slope. It determines the v, right. So it's going to determine, the m determines the slope, right, which is the steepness. What else does it determine? If it goes up or down, right, it determines the direction. So the m affects both the steepness and the direction, right? If it's a positive m, right, we have our v going up. If it's a negative m, that v is going down, right? So that's how the m affects it. You want to make sure you look at the notes and are able to tell me, well, how does the x1 affect it? How does the y1 affect it, right? One of them moves them left and right. The other one moves that whole vertex up and down, right? And it's really moving the vertex when we are talking about the x and the y point. So you want to be, pretty well defined as to how it moves that. In that question, when I look at that, there are 16 points again for those 4 questions. And then that last standard that I have up there, I can graph 2 variable equations and inequalities. Notice it says linear, piecewise, absolute value, and compound inequalities. So when we are looking at that, this might be when I'm shading, right? That's that compound inequality. This is when you have to do the shading. when I look at that absolute value, I'm gonna look that you get the vertex in the right spot, right? I'm gonna make sure that it's going in the right direction from how you answered this question. The linear one, it might be point slope form, it could be slope intercept, it could be standard form, right? It could be any of those forms, so like the first quiz. That first quiz, we graphed a linear, and did we have, and inequalities, right? It was linear and inequalities on the first quiz. We didn't have any absolute value or piecewise, okay? And then I do want to show you, so that's kind of what, if you're thinking of your test, and again, there are 16 points here, okay? Question.